So there are three intellectual components. Let's break them down. The first stage is when we get a flash of information. This idea falls into our mind, but we don't necessarily fully understand it yet. The second stage is when we start to process it and incorporate it in our vast bank of knowledge and details and facts. The third stage is when we connect to it on a personal level and start to appreciate the idea. Okay, so now let's elaborate on all this. In an old suburb long ago, there was a wagon driver who had just come back from the big city, and he was explaining to all of his friends, his fellow wagon drivers, how he saw this wagon and it was driving without a horse. He said they called it a train or something. All his friends laughed at him and said it's impossible, How could a wagon drive without a horse? But for him, this was a fact. He saw it with his own eyes. This is the first stage of knowledge that we were talking about before. It's that stage where we just have this knowledge. We know that it's true. We know that it's a fact. We know that it's there, but we don't necessarily fully understand it. Everything we know or understand had a stage in our lives where we didn't understand it and know it yet. There was this time where we got this piece of information, but we still didn't fully comprehend it and incorporate it in our understanding of things. Not only wagon drivers experience this, even the greatest of minds have a time where they just had this idea, which they later have to develop further. But in its first stage, all knowledge has not yet been comprehended and understood. It's in the second stage of logic where we start to dissect and understand this topic. That flash of information, which originally was not yet fully understood, is now solidified and brought together into our vast knowledge of details and bank of information, where it is stored and now seen as something which we understand and part of everything we know. If we were wagon drivers, we would now understand how steam trains operate and how their engines run. If we were Einstein, then we would now have all our maths worked out and put together. But the truth is, this is something which is all across the board throughout all of our lives, from relationships to business and even the making of this very video you're watching right now. We first get a generalized picture in our mind, the first stage, and then we develop it further into something tangible and worked out, the second stage. These two stages are compared to when we see something with our eyes versus when we hear about something with our ears and develop it in our minds. Imagine walking through the halls of the Louvre. You come across this painting which catches your eyes and you start staring at it and looking at it quite deeply. That's the first stage of knowledge right there. Suddenly, your friend comes over to you and starts telling you about this stunning painting they've seen on the other side of the hall. They describe the trees, the flowers, the landscape, the story, the people involved. Now we need to start imagining and forming a picture in our minds. That right there is the second stage of understanding. So when we see something with our eyes, we're only exposed to the first stage of knowledge, which is that flash of information which is true to the facts. When we're being explained something by someone, so we're only hearing about it, we need to start using our own power of imagination and analytics to understand and form a picture in our mind. This stage is more subjective. It's how we comprehend and understand the issue in our own minds and brains. And now we reach the third stage. This stage is attainable once we've covered the first two stages. Once we know something as it is, and we've also incorporated it into our own subjective understanding and solidified it in our minds, now we can reach this third stage. This third stage is when we connect and incorporate the idea into our personal lives and make it our own. Imagine a smoker. Now, I'm not trying to judge anyone over here, I'm just giving an example. So, smoker goes to a class about the dangers of smoking and everything it can do to the lungs and all the other scary things that it can cause. At first, the smoker is just listening to the class and taking in the information that is being said and seeing it as it is being said. Afterwards, the smoker can start analyzing it and understanding it and seeing how this connects to everything they understand, and then they can connect to it on a personal level and see how this impacts their own health. In this stage, it's no longer an idea, something foreign outside which is far from us. This becomes something very personal and something which we connect to. Same with exercise. We can know how good it is and know all the details which science tells us about it, but we need to connect to it on a personal level in order for it to impact us in our day-to-day lives. So if it's the wagon driver, when they connect to the concept, they'll now understand that trains put their jobs in jeopardy. If it was us at the Louvre, then we'll start to connect and understand all the emotions the artist was conveying with his paintbrush. So now that we've discussed the 3 levels of intellectual evolution, it's the 3rd stage which connects us to the thing personally and triggers our emotional response. And this brings us to part 2 of this video, how emotions are born from our intellectual understanding. When we know something, understand it, and connect to it on a personal level, then we start to develop feelings and emotions to the subject at hand. Let's take war, for example. At first, we can learn about it in history class and not give it necessarily too much attention. That would be stage 1 of our intellect. Then in stage 2, when we start breaking it down and start understanding all the horrors, the misery, and the bloodshed created by armed conflict. Stage 3, in the context of armed conflict, might already be a very personal situation for many of us, whether we personally or a loved one is or ever was involved in such a situation. Same applies to the wagon driver, the smoker, the professor, or our decision to start doing exercise or not. In order for us to get to feelings and emotions, we first have to have a personal connection. Afterwards, we start feeling, and then that brings us to action. Feelings are our experiences and interest of our surroundings. When we feel for something, that's what brings us to do it. The truth is that we could get ourselves to do something even if we don't have much feelings for it, but that will take us into a rabbit hole, and we have a whole other video discussing this topic, so we'll save it for then. We're also running out of time, so let's move on to part 3 for now. You may have noticed a pattern in these 3 stages of logic and how they lead to emotions. So there's me, or you, and then there's the concept. In the first stage, the concept is completely removed from us. We don't have any personal connection, and we definitely don't fully understand it yet. It's just there and completely disconnected from us. Then we bring it closer and incorporate it within our experiences. This brings the concept nearer, and only then do we connect to it. We make it ours, we bring it in and start to feel for it like it's a part of us. It becomes something we internalize and care about. This explains how the soul communicates with us in our bodies. The soul is spiritual and pure and sees everything with sincerity and truth. The soul is always communicating with us. She's constantly sending us messages and trying to get us to do good things in this world. She's asking us to become sincere and truthful people with ourselves and our surroundings. But how can we hear and receive these messages? The first stage of logic is the perfect candidate to receive these messages from the soul. In its first stage, we don't understand or internalize the concept at hand, we just accept it's there. This intellectual stage has the ability to receive these messages from the soul since it doesn't need to fully comprehend these intangible and sincere concepts coming its way. When we pause for a moment and think into the soul and what she wants, we might not understand or relate to her divine wishes, but we can accept them and see them in an objective form. This is why we discussed the 3 stages of logic for so long. If we continue and develop these ideas even further, we can bring them down into the 2nd stage and connect with them and internalize with them even more until we reach action in this physical world. So when I'm walking down the street and an idea enters my mind to give charity to a person in need, I can either take that idea, which is in my mind, and develop it further until I understand it, connect to it, and bring it down into my emotions, get inspired, and want to go ahead and help that person out in this physical world. Or I can just leave that idea as a foreign concept in my mind. That's enough for this video, but there's so much more to cover, like how these messages even get to us from a pure being like the soul in the first place, how it can sometimes skip emotions and go straight into action from understanding an intellectual idea, and so much more, like how to uncover the goodness deep inside every single person, and how we can balance our desires for human temptations together with the purity of the soul. But if you haven't subscribed and liked and watched the video till this part, YouTube might not ever send these videos to you again. So for those of you who are there, take care for now.